Welcome. I'm Corinne Field. I'm chair of the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality, and I'm so excited to welcome you to this collaboration between the Maxine Platzerlin Women's Center and WGS. This is the combined Women's History Month keynote, Beverly, Cobble, Rodriguez Lecture, and WGS Reads event. Bravo. I want to, first, the title is just wonderful. You're here tonight to hear A Beginner's Guide to Worldmaking, a conversation inspired by Octavia Butler with Susana Morris and Chanel Kraft Tanner. And I can't imagine two better people or a more wonderful topic for you to be hearing tonight. So I want to start with some quick thank yous from WGS. I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Bonnie Hagerman, who originated the idea for WGS Reads, to Bridget Murphy for organizing, and to our marketing intern, Allison Silverstone. From the Women's Center, special thanks to Joe and Beverly Rodriguez for endowing an annual lecture hosted by the Women's Center on women's education and global leadership. To Annie and our social media interns for their innovative marketing. Wasn't that a great poster, you all? And Carol for logistics and Leanne for publicity, and thanks to the people who provided the wonderful food. I'm just so glad you're all here. In Parable of the Sower, Octavia Butler wrote, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change." Doctors Morris and Tanner have been creating positive change and making better worlds together for many years now. They are both members of the Crunk Feminist Collective, which was founded in 2004 and is now the longest running feminist collective in the US. CFC has provided a model for long-term feminist community building and knowledge production. You can read their foundational contributions to feminist theory online or in the Crunk Feminist Collection, published in 2017, which is a fantastic read. Excuse me while I turn this. I didn't remember all the accolades. In 2021, along with Brittany Cooper, they published Feminist AF, A Guide to Crushing Girlhood. This book provides young people with the tools they need to become feminist world builders. You should get the book for any young person in your life. While pursuing these vital collaborations, Susana Morris has become Associate Professor and Associate Chair of Literature, Media, and Communication at Georgia Tech. She is the author of Close Kin and Distant Relatives, The Paradox of Respectability in Black Women's Literature, which explores how African American and Caribbean women writers wrote themselves, quote, into and against prevailing narratives of family. She shows how writers use diasporic cultural practices such as blues, storytelling, and healing to envision worlds in which families of many diverse forms would provide mutual care and accountability. Her most recent book, and the launching pad for this conversation tonight, is Positive Obsession, The Life and Times of Octavia Butler, a masterpiece of cultural biography that provides a deeper understanding of Butler's transformative vision for the future. And we are so lucky to have at UVA Chanel Kraft Tanner as the director of the Women's Center. Dr. Tanner holds a PhD in WGS from Emory University, where she also served as the director of Emory's Center for Women. She is deeply committed to integrating academic work with feminist practice, and I cannot wait to hear what she's going to tell you about feminist world building tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Morris. Thank
you. Thank you so much. And welcome. As we get settled, just a quick logistical piece. So the social media interns thought it'd be a really good idea to have a giveaway. And so it's 2 Kodak Pix Pro. I don't know, I'm not young. Am I getting it right? Kodak Pix Pro cameras. So if you have not, you have to, we'll draw the names at the end. So you have to stay. But if you have not entered your name into the raffle yet, please do that so we can draw your names.
Y'all got nice gifts.
We do have nice gifts. This is a very nice women's center. And so when thinking about this, well, first of all, good evening. Good evening, everyone. Continue to eat the food, continue to have the fake libations as we set the mood. But when we began thinking about Women's History Month and a Women's History Month keynote, what that could look like, because we've never had one at the Women's Center, we were thinking about not just what we've inherited, but what it is that we're building, what we're carrying forward, and what we're still trying to imagine. So one of the things that makes Octavia Butler so powerful is that she imagined futures where Black people existed and where we actually make it and where we continue. She did that not by looking away from the world as it was, but instead she studied its histories, its patterns, its possibilities really closely. So tonight, we're not just here to reflect on her life and work. We're here to sit with a set of questions that feel especially present right now. And that is, how do we live in this moment? How do we imagine responsibly? How do we inherit without being tracked? And how do we build futures when the present feels uncertain? We've titled this conversation A Beginner's Guide to Worldmaking because we believe that worldmaking is not something reserved for a few people or for some distant future. It's something we're already doing in how we think, how we create, how we relate to one another, and how we choose to move through the world. Tonight is an invitation to think about that more intentionally, not just what we imagine, but how we imagine, not just what we inherit, but what we also may be leaving behind. So we're incredibly honored to be joined by my dear friend, Susana M, whose work helps us think across time about culture, community, the practices that allow us to endure and to build. So I invite you all to settle in and be present and to think with us. I wanted this to be a little bit more informal of a keynote and kind of inspired by those lectures on tap, what it would mean for us to really do this in community. And so since Susana is my friend for real, she's my for real homegirl, wanted this to kind of feel like something that y'all were listening into. So the questions that I pose are really things that I'm grappling with and trying to figure out. And because Susana is one of the smartest people that I know and someone who I'd often be like, I don't know, what do we do? What do we do about this? I just figured that we just tap into that moment. But because we're friends for real, I'm the queen of icebreakers. I don't know if you know that about me, but I love a good icebreaker. My team is laughing because they love that so much that every meeting I'm going to start with an icebreaker.
Okay.
But my favorite one is, what are you watching? What are you reading? And what are you listening to?
Okay.
And can y'all hear us okay? Is the volume?
Yeah, can y'all hear us? Just fine. Okay. First of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here with y'all. I've never been to Charlottesville before, so even though I have many beloveds here, thank you for welcoming me. What am I reading, watching,
and listening to?
Reading, reading/listening to audiobook. It's called A Little Kissing Between Friends by Chensia Huggins. It's a sapphic romance novel. So, I'll just leave it at that. Go ahead and look that up. Grown people business. And what am I watching? I just recently rewatched Sinners.
Yeah.
Can y'all hear? Okay.
Maybe I turn like this.
Is that better? I don't know.
Is yours on?
Child, let's see.
Let's see. I don't think yours is on.
It wasn't on. Okay, is that better? Okay, thank you for that. Was I saying something?
You were reading.
Oh, what am I reading? Oh yeah, well, it's the romance novel. I'm not really reading anything else, but really I just been doing audiobooks.
And you were rewatching Sinners.
I watched Sinners again.
I'm about to rewatch it too.
Yeah, it's really good.
And what are you listening to? Is the same as what you're reading? Or is there music? Is there a playlist?
I am listening to Jill Scott's new album because I'm a millennial of a certain age. So I just feel like I have to do that. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let me see. I just finished finally Bel-Air.
Oh.
Yeah, that was really good as a millennial of a certain age.
Yeah.
I'm watching that. I'm listening to J. Cole. Because I'm a millennial.
Oh my God.
Listen, they say.
Was the scarf and the jean jacket a giveaway?
I mean, and then I'm reading Honestly, Truthfully Positive Obsession. I'm not just trying to plug it, but like in preparation for tonight.
I appreciate that.
I was reading that. So that's mine. Okay. So
for real people, feminists.
Yeah.
We actually pay it. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So for the topic of today, I think my first question is, how did you come to science fiction and to Octavia Butler in particular? How did that become an interest of yours?
I was always into science fiction. I never stopped being into fairy tale stories and things like that. I know that oftentimes there's a time when you grow out of that. And I just was like, I like this forever. In fact, I'm going to make it my job. That's how hard I love it. So I've always liked mythologies, high fantasy, lords and ladies and elves and dragons and all the things, and space travel. And so read a lot of that on my own because it wasn't something that I was learning in school. And then in high school, I discovered Octavia Butler. She was my entry point to Black science fiction and fantasy because I had just not seen anything with any Black people in it. I thought we just didn't do that.
Yeah. How did you?
The library, right? So I go to my local library. I'm from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So I went to one of my local branches, and in the science fiction and fantasy section, there was kind of a display. And it had Parable of the Sower just kind of facing out. And I thought, there's a Black person on this book in this section. And then I read it, the back cover, and I thought, oh my gosh. And she's like my age. And it's set like in a time period where I should be alive, although I would be old. I thought, I'll be in my 40s in the 2020s. How here we are. And I borrowed it from the library, and that's all she wrote.
Yeah.
In terms of being into Black science fiction and fantasy and recognizing, there is a whole world out there that I just wasn't being introduced to, even though I was a voracious reader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like 2024, November, that passage from Octavia Butler, I should have brought it and printed it out, but it goes viral. And I'm just wondering, like, why do you think that is? And what do you think science fiction, Butler, all of that has to offer us in this moment?
Yeah. So Parable of the Sower opens on July 20th, 2024. So on July 20th, 2024, many people were sort of making the connections between what's happening in the novel and what's happening in our own world. And I get why it's viral because there are so many resonances, between her imagined 2024, 5, 6, 7, and our actual experience of it, the sort of things that are happening politically, the things that are happening in terms of climate change. So it made sense that folks were geared up to be like, see, she predicted this, which, I have feelings about. But I think there is this kind of general understanding that science fiction is prescient, and you read it if you want to find out about the future. And I don't think that that's entirely true. I think that science fiction and fantasy, whether we're sort of imagining an alternate present or future or an reimagined past, it is a particular genre that, at its best, gets readers to understand that there are lots of different ways to understand the world, right? Butler is sort of known for this phrase, there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns, right? And so that to me is almost the purview of science fiction and fantasy. There are these other suns that you can learn from underneath, There are different ways to understand humanity, that there are different ways to...
I'm sorry, are they just gonna get louder?
I don't know, I'm trying my best.
I think Connor's gonna ask.
Okay.
I'm
like, what's going on?
Is it? I don't know. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Well, people are practicing.
I don't know.
Okay.
That's so.
Well, this is a place of education, so practice on. So I include a quote from Butler from her essay Positive Obsession, where she talks about what science fiction in particular does for Black folk, right? It takes us off this narrow beaten path of what people say we're supposed to think, know, feel, and so on. And that's of particular importance to Black people. It's important to everybody, but it's particularly important to us, right? And I think science fiction and fantasy is uniquely positioned to ask those kinds of questions, just large existential questions.
You said, when you said people talk about her predicting the future, then you said, I feel a way about that. What's the way you feel? Because she seems like a prophet to me. Like she's predicting the future and it's like kind of scary.
Right. No, I understand why we would say that. So particularly with the Parable series, Parable of the Talents has a president whose slogan is "Let's make America great again." You know, so when and there's some, passing similarities between.
There's a Donner in there as one of the presidents.
It's a lot happening, But I think in all due seriousness, when we talk about her solely or primarily as a prophet, it invites us to abdicate our own responsibilities, right? So we're not going to be Octavia Butler. She's a one-of-one talent. We understand that. And yet also we can be more rigorous in our reading practices. We can be news junkies. Maybe not now, but she called herself a news junkie because she was addicted to reading news from all sorts of persuasions and perspectives and so on, reading history books, being in conversation with others, going to lectures for fun. I know some people it's extra credit, and I love that for you. Yes. But where, learning happens outside of the classroom. You need to be learning all the time. These are things that she provides a possibility model, for. So we can do that, even if we can't write Parable of the Sower. So sometimes that language of prophecy or oracle just elevates her to a sort of pedestal. And the only thing you can do from a pedestal is go down, right? Like tumble from it. We don't need her on a pedestal. Her work is prescient for sure. Well, it's more a cautionary tale. It's not that she thought this had to happen. She's writing to let us know that this could happen, right? Which is one of the reasons why she set the Parable series in the near future. So they're published in 1993 and 1998 respectively, but they take place in the 2020s and beyond. It could have been set in 2100 or 2500, right? She said it 30 years in the future to say these things could actually happen. Not that they have to happen or are going to happen, but that there is the particular kind of fuel for this particular future to be catalyzed. But how did she know that? Because she went and she looked at all the historical events, right, that inform, say, the rise of conservatism politically, right? She was very interested in that. She was a California native, so she was familiar with Ronald Reagan, who was her arch nemesis, right? He didn't know about her necessarily, right? But everywhere he went, she was like, oh, there he is, spreading his foolishness. Like, she really detested him. And so a lot of her villains, like the villainry that you see in the Parable series is absolutely connected to him, right? And his policies and what she thought would succeed him, right? That he might have particular kinds of influence, but then the folks who would be raised under him, the folks who would work alongside him, that they would have a global impact, right? And she was not incorrect. So that's what I mean about reading. It's not simply like I'm reading. I mean, she read voraciously and widely, but really reading the situation. Okay, so what does a tariff mean? I imagine if she were alive today, if I can be so bold. What is a tariff? She would go down a rabbit hole and learn all that she could about tariffs, right? Then she would read anything that was connected to our current president, let's say his ideas around making deals or something, right? It's a couple of memoirs, right? She would do that. She would then find the different players, like, okay, well, let me read about this person's background. This person's a chancellor of XYZ. This person's the two-time prime minister over here. Let me go do a deep dive of the Eastern Bloc. Light reading, right? But she would make all these kinds of connections and make notes. And sometimes they, quote unquote, didn't go anywhere. There are reams and reams and reams of paper of her just writing notes about news programs, things she read, ideas about, oh, this is why feudalism ended in this way. And she would go off down a rabbit hole. And maybe that would amount to one line or a paragraph that seemingly is not connected to anything, but it's because she understood sort of the larger makeup of the world, right? And so any world that she built, even if it was a realistic world, like the world of Kindred, involved a lot of research. So again, we don't have to be Octavia Butler, but we can research our world. We can say, well, why does it happen this way? Did you know this? And maybe your friend knows a thing. And it's like, actually, I listened to a whole podcast about this. What's the podcast? You go listen to that podcast. Then you tell your sorority sister, yo, I really love this podcast. Now everybody in sorority doesn't listen to this. And it reverberates on and on and on. And then you're having conversations. We can't be passive receivers of the world. Octavia's work does not invite us to move in that way, right? If you consider if you consider yourself to be a fan of her work, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So I want to think a little bit about history because you're talking about her really diving deep into history and also in the present.
Sure.
And so when we had to pause our programs last year so we could understand what the current policies meant for how we do our work, it made me kind of think a lot about Sankofa and that Ghanaian idea that it's important to learn from the past in order to inform the future. Also know that Butler's ability to predict the future, as you were saying, is really grounded in her reading of the past and her ability to recognize patterns. So in that case, we can think of history as a requirement. But then I'm thinking about this tension. I told you these are real questions that I have, where I heard Angela Davis speak before, and someone, during the Q&A was asking or kind of chiding how young people didn't know enough of their history. And, her response was a bit surprising in that she didn't feel like it was necessary for them to know history to do the work of now. Let the people just do work. But then I think about Kindred, where the protagonist does go back in the past. And when she returns, she comes back permanently scarred. So she went back to get it, but then came back harmed. So there's a risk in history. So my question is where do you fall in the importance of history? Is history a resource? Is it a requirement? Or is it a risk? Do we need the past in order to build the future?
I like the question a lot. I think that ideally, it would be a both and. I'm a both and person. I think history is important to know. I do think that if it doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. It's helpful to understand what's come before us. We can't be completely. Our lives can't be overdetermined by history at the same time, right? Because I think sometimes it's read your history, know your history, and then what are we going to do with that? Are we learning from people's mistakes? Are we learning from strategies that were really good, but that got bogged down or erased or forgotten for any number of reasons, right? Is it excavating things that are important for us to understand who we are today? There's a reason why there's lots of books being banned and all of this, right? Because folks don't necessarily want everyone to have access to the less desirable parts of our history, right? And so I think that history is very important to that end. But again, it's not so much that history is just, because this happened 50 years ago, that means only this can happen. So an example I would give is maybe a frequent issue in when we're studying gender, right? Things like controlling images, right? So it's the idea that there are these long-standing tropes, particularly if we're talking about Black women's images and sort of contemporary media landscape. We're okay, we got to go back to the mammy. We have to go back to the sapphire and those figures. And I think that those figures are important. And understanding them and how they continue to affect media portrayals today is very important. And things are more complicated than that sort of understanding, right? We have even a limited understanding of the tools that we bring in. We say, okay, well, this is just how it is. They're just controlling images. That's that, right? I wouldn't want anybody to not learn about that history, but I don't want that history to overdetermine because Black women have been making their own meaning in media spaces for a long time. And if we're only looking at the sort of larger portrayals that are hanging over us and not seeing the resistance, right? Or the ways in which things weren't even affected over here. These people actually weren't a part of this larger pop culture phenomenon. They were over here doing this. If we only look at one thing, right, and say this is the history that we're beholden to, we may miss some of the complications. So I think it's both and. Learn the thing, but don't be, tied down by it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So then the future then.
Indeed. Okay.
And this question is really about how we dream under constraint.
Mm-hmm.
And, I said in the opening that one of the things that makes Butler's work so significant is because she was one of the first writers to represent a future where Black people would exist and that we would be there navigating power, building systems, surviving, adapting, like we were really in the future. And recently at the National Women's Studies Association conference, there was this call for us to be to intentionally dream the worlds we want to live in right now, beyond just surviving the moment, but really that there's a future where we win. And I'm struggling with that right now because it feels like survival is the priority. And of course, even in focusing on survival, there is a sense that we do make it, because then what are we surviving? But I don't know if I believe the world that I want is actually going to make it. So how do you, or if you don't have it, how did Octavia Butler, how do you dream when the world feels and is so unstable?
I think because then what is the alternative? Is it to give in to the despair? That is a choice, right? I don't think it's a choice that we fully, those of us who are on the margins of so many things, whether we're talking about sexuality or gender presentation or ability or your status as a documented or undocumented person, there's so many things we could think of. In whose favor does it work for me to have a nihilistic kind of understanding of life and myself that I'm automatically losing, right? Because that's sort of the expectation that Blackness is fungible, that we're just sort of objectified in a particular kind of way. And that's that. We're just at the mercy of these larger systems. And I just don't think that that's true. The systems are impacting us in very tangible kinds of ways. But again, if we were not powerful, folks would not be trying to subdue us. So all the more reason to continue to do the work of living, of life, of, and I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish or anything like that, but a thing that I fervently believe is that our various ancestors who are striving for some of the presence and features that we have, they were Afro-futurists, right? In some ways, right? I'm thinking of an ancestor who's alive in 1830 or something, right? Who is thinking one day I'm going to have descendants that are free. And they may not ever live to see that, right? But they're moving in a world in a way where I'm passing something along. Yes, legally I might be considered a movable object, but there are things in this family that I'm going to share. There is a scrap of song. There is a story that's going to be passed on to people that they couldn't even imagine fully. And I'm hopeful that that's the same for us, that those of us who are fighting for climate change, changes to how we are experiencing climate change, if we're fighting for any kind of social justice to make the world more equitable and so on, the things that we want to have happen are not going to happen in our lifetime. But the things that we see today, someone 250 years from now, they might even dust off a picture of this room, right? In this moment. And folks were gathered, struggling through ideas together, right? And many of the ideas we have, we're not going to see them, right? But what we're sitting in right now is somebody's hope from 100 years ago. On this campus? Love you down, but yeah, no, right?
I mean, I think you said as the alternative, despair. But I think there's another, I don't know, something in the middle. I'm thinking about how okay, after November or in November of 2024, the first thing I went and did was I had this chart that I used to teach my kids how to read. And I went immediately to my brother's house to teach my niece who was visiting how to read. She's 5 years old and the state that she lives in is 45th in education. And I knew where things were going and I wanted to prepare her. I don't know if that's an intention difference, right? There is we're gonna make it, but my the way I was teaching her how to read was from a very different place than when I taught my children how to read. And so that feels like, it doesn't feel generative and imaginative in a way where I'm like, I'm teaching her to read because I see her being a writer one day in a world in where, I want to be like that.
That's how inspiration works, though. In general, you know, I mean, of course, we're also talking about Octavia Butler, who didn't really believe in inspiration. She believed in habit. Like every day you do a thing, regardless of what comes before it or what's to come afterward, you know?
Yeah.
So you're doing this work, whether it's in the dark or no, you don't have an agent. Nobody believes in your work. You're doing it for fun. You're not getting paid, whatever, it at all. You just need to do it.
Yeah.
So she needs to know how to read. She needs to be empowered in a particular kinds of way. And maybe it's not the years of like everything is sort of on an upward swing. We do seem to be in a kind of apocalypse of sorts, right? One of many, right? The world's ended many times for many people. But regardless of like your feeling behind it, I think that work still stands up, right? That sort of saying, this person's experience on Earth now, right? She needs to be an informed, curious, critical thinker. And that starts from 5 and above and all of that. That you don't have to be like, yes, and because we're walking into the Black feminist future.
Yeah.
No, we need her to be a badass anyway, though.
That's true.
You know?
Okay.
But again, I'm not saying that by, I don't want to be understood as dismissive in any kind of way. Right. Because when I said the world has ended many times for many people, I don't mean that in a glib fashion.
Yeah.
You know, like it's currently ending for multiple people, and it may very well happen for us too. Right. And yet, and also, I just don't think we can be arrogant enough to be like it's only us. Right. This is a sort of a quotidian part of being a human. And you continue to do things.
Okay. I'm gonna try to hold on. It also feels like this is a second kind of related question, but separate. That like in order to be in a space of dreaming and imagination, you have to turn things off. And you said a little while ago, like a news junkie, and then you said maybe not today. And so that's what's making me think about this. That like literally to dream, you have to go to sleep. You have to turn things off so you can dream. And it almost feels like now, like you have to turn it off in order to imagine a world. But then that doesn't feel ethical either. Like to be unaware right now. How do you, I don't know, that's just another tension that I'm feeling.
Tension.
Yeah.
I think that there's maybe balance is probably not the right word, but it's a dance, right? I don't think that we can afford to not be plugged in at all. But there are ways in which we're plugged in, right?
Or we can't, I don't know, sometimes it feels like we can't afford to be because of the psychic damage that does to be
But we're already seeing it in our everyday lives too. That's the other thing. I think it's a bombardment. It's an overstimulation of it all. It's because you can't really fully unplug, right? And if you are a queer person, a Black person, a brown person, insert any number of identities where systems of power are, impacting your life in these grave ways, there is no turning it off, you know? Like, if you love a queer person, you don't even have to be a queer person, but if you love a queer person, you already know, because you're in community with people, that some stuff is happening, right? You don't have to watch the news for that because you're in community. So I think that's part of the thing is, we're being inundated. It's not that we have no idea. I'm sure there are people who have no idea. But how do we talk about these things? Are we talking about them in a room like this with other folks that we can organize with, right? If something on campus isn't right, then you can turn to the people who are next to you, hopefully, and say, oh, I actually want to work on this issue with you, right? Rather than like things are happening to us, we're consuming news, right? It's more that we have to have a kind of interplay that we're involved in things, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good place to go next, which is about community and relationships. Because in the book, Butler seemed to understand the importance of community, but also struggled with isolation and not really seeming to quite know how to build it. She seemed lonely. Like she wanted friends, but then she didn't really have many, which felt sad.
At certain points in her life.
Okay.
At certain points, not always. I mean, she
had that. She also had that girlfriend that was sick that she was taking care of. But continue.
I mean, throughout Butler's life, she struggled with social cues and understanding like when to say what when, right? And so I think today we would use the language of neurodivergence, but she was born in 1947, so people were not using, they were using other language, you know. And so by the time she passes away, she dies young at age 58, she has this really robust correspondence, you know, so this was pre-texting for the most part. I mean, I guess we did have text in 2006, but it wasn't as prevalent. But she wrote letters to lots of people. She had long phone conversations. She toured and talked about her books. She went to universities and, you know, she worked with students. She taught students at the Clarion Writers Workshop. She built a whole world, right? But brick by brick, because again, there weren't very many models for this very tall woman. She was 6 feet tall by the time she was like 12, who was shy, spoke with a lisp, did not always look at people in their eyes, right? There was a particular narrative about her intelligence and things like that, right? And it's not a question of her intelligence. It is, am I sort of understanding the normative cues that I'm being given? And the answer was no, she wasn't understanding them. And she had to, for the rest of her life, write notes to herself. Okay, when you go to this party, do this, act this way, right? Because there was no leeway or grace for her being like, oh, you know, that's Octavia. She's a little weird. Like, it's cool. We're all a little weird, right? There was not really that understanding of Black women and autism or neurodiversion. Yeah.
Okay.
But she did end up having lots of friends and community.
Well, I think that's that's really actually my question is like, how then, right? And you said she built it brick by brick. And I do think that we often talk about community as if it's something we should value and it should just come naturally.
But it requires work.
Yeah, it requires work.
It requires work. So a thing that I would always chuckle at in the archive is like reading her, reading responses to her letters, or sometimes there'd be copies of her letters there as well, not just her correspondence. And folks would be chiding her about not writing back quickly. Or she would write that in her own letters, like, girl, I know it's been a while. I'm a terrible correspondent. Let's send you more letters, because she loved getting letters. She just didn't like responding to them. Okay, girl. But so, you know, she had folks who were checking in on her. And she did the work that was hard for her and sometimes uncomfortable, of putting herself out there, of showing up to spaces where sometimes she just wanted to be at home, curled up with a book, because she was a deep introvert. And I know I have some deep introverts in the house now. I won't make you raise your hands. But so she would sometimes, you know, write in her notes like, okay, I know that I would rather be at home reading, but I also need people, so I'm going to go do this thing, right? As much as she enjoyed her own company, which she did, which I love about her, but she made efforts even when it was against her nature. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you have to build community, you have to, you get out of it what you put in it. It requires some sacrifice. So that's one of the ways that community isn't always easy, is that it's not always going to be the thing you want to do.
Yeah, it's like, not going to be convenient.
That's the word. Yeah. But also sometimes like there's conflict, there's misunderstanding, there are moments where it's easier to step away.
That's right.
So how do you stay in community? How do you build that stamina for that? And I'm asking because I know there are a lot of students in the room, and right now community is easy. It's right here at UVA. Maybe not easy for everyone, but you know, when you graduate, it gets a little bit more challenging. Or if you're new to organizing, and we're all saying that, right? Like a lot of what we have to do is take it offline and go back to the grassroots. You may get in those spaces and, you know, get cussed out a little bit. How do you stay? How do you develop that stamina?
I think being very clear about your boundaries, right? Not allowing people to walk all over you or manipulate you is one thing, right? A thing that we should, a kind of muscle that we should all develop. But conflict is normal and common. And so understanding that that is also part of community, That doesn't mean that you just have to accept any old kind of behavior. No, it's more that we understand that every one of us has the capacity to harm another person. One, every single one of us has harmed another person to varying degrees, right? Doesn't mean that you're a terrible person, but you told your roommate that you're gonna take out the trash. This is the 3rd week in a row you haven't done it. Right? I'm not saying you to be a serial killer to harm people, right? I didn't keep my promise. And now this is, building on these other problems that I have dealing with this person in this shared space. So I need to do a particular thing, right? Conflict doesn't mean you have to immediately leave, break up, don't talk to, block said person. And Blockiana over here. I will block people, it's fine. But if you really want to be in community, that means that you're not always going to be agreeing with one another, that you can learn how to disagree and compromise and all these kinds of things. I think that in a time where things are so polarized, that may sound like kind of wishy-washy behavior, like stand on business. If you believe this particular thing, then you believe it. And I think, yes. And also, if you are doing any kind of organizing work, that means you're going to be talking to people that you don't fully agree with. You're going to be making moves with these particular kinds of people, and there should be some level of alignment, but you're not going to align on every single thing. And then what?
Yeah.
Right? And there's different kinds of community. There's folks where you're like, yeah, I organize with you. I've done these things, but am I going to go have a beer with you, if you're over 21, afterwards? No, they're work friends.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And some work friends become family. It just depends, right? So you can be in community with a person and not be texting and kikiing with them.
Yeah, there's levels to it.
There's levels to it, too, right? So
that makes sense. Okay, I want to shift a little bit because I feel like the world making part of the event title requires us to spend a little bit of time on how we make new worlds, how we make things. So a few years ago, a student asked me, what is women's culture? Because it's not as easy to pin down in the way that you can say, like, that's Black culture, or that's Irish culture, or whatever. And so I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to find out what is women's culture. And in searching for that, I think that it's crafting. I think it's like making stuff. And that's something that women do across many cultures, many races. So I'm all into it. Whenever we do crafting things, people come. We've gotten together and done crafting. You have the best markers. And so I love when we get together and craft. So I'm thinking about world making as a practice and how those forms of making things connect to that. Do you see making things as connected to your work in the world, like your activism, or does it live somewhere else, like care, restoration? Like, what does making things mean to you?
It's so funny because I am at an interdisciplinary school, university, and also my department, literature, media, and communication, is inherently kind of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. And so our graduate program is called Digital Media. And our tagline is making with meaning, right? But I was not hired as a maker, right? I am a theorist. So that's sort of an interesting tension there. Your question makes me think of Alice Walker's essay In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And in it, she describes that, for us to really understand art, Black women's art in particular, we have to look beyond the sort of normative spaces of the gallery and the museum and those kinds of things. But you need to look in your mother's gardens. That might be where she has her most creative impulse. It might be in the hair braiding. It might be in the nail tech, and having the acrylics that look a particular kind of way. I'm updating it for a modern audience. And so I think that making is such a critical part of Black women's cultural production. I think it's true across women's culture, if we can be really in a sort of general. But there's a particular kind of logic to being in community with other folks when you're sort of using your hands to work on something similar, right? Whether it's a quilt or it's baking or it's fashioning, your particular kind of style, coming up with dances together. There's always this So I want us to think about making kind of expansively and not simply like, yes, I painted this thing, but it's creating culture and community. And so I would say the CFC is one of the best things I help to make, right? And that we are a collective that has published and done these things, but we're primarily a friend group, right? That has allowed a group of 7 diverse people who have different life paths to thrive, because that's one of our sort of areas of support. I think that's making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also seen someone saying on some social media platform, but that like it's the makers who will know what to do in this time and who will have the stamina. Because like if you're quilting something, if you're crocheting something, it's not something that comes instantly, and people are looking for instant fixes, but the artists know that it takes more time, so they are the ones that can hold the note a little longer,
because it takes thousands of hours to perfect this particular kind of craft, right? Whatever it is. And I think oftentimes there is a sort of like, oh, my mom just knows how to do this thing, or my aunt just does this thing, and it's like, this person's a master at what they do. If your granny has been baking bread for 70 years, she's a master baker. That's just what it is, right? True. And there's often a dismissal of women's care work and craft work too.
So earlier you talked about just the sheer amount of stuff that Octavia Butler left for you to go through. And she kept everything, notes, drafts, receipts even. And how that made work like yours possible, and her other biographers, they're able to do that. But it makes me wonder what it means to live as someone whose life might matter later. Like with the thought that like later on, who I am may matter enough for people to want to see the stuff that I do. So if world making is about shaping what comes next, then what does it mean to leave behind something that helps someone else imagine? And should we all be more intentional about documenting our own lives?
I have, I think, complicated feelings about the latter, because I have so many questions about social media and surveillance.
I think I was thinking more like in the way that she did, right? Scrapbooking and papers. And I didn't even think about social media and surveillance. So let me just clarify, like that. Building an archive for yourself. Should we be doing that?
Yes.
What should we keep? What is
it that makes you you in particular? So, I love to color. That's the thing I'm really into. So I feel like if I'm going to do a time capsule of Susana at age 45, include these particular kinds of things. It's a question I think about, because I don't know. Should we talk about the Radcliffe?
Sure, yeah.
So the Schlesinger approached us years ago and asked the Crunk Feminist Collective to donate our papers to the Schlesinger at Radcliffe. And so we're like, cool, yeah, we'll do that. And so whenever I go to throw something out, Brittany Cooper, my co-founder, is like, you better not throw that out. That's for the archive.
Need that for the archive.
Like, they don't need to know about that raggedy situation. Delete the rag. But I do think that we should, in all due seriousness, all live like what we have experienced is worthy of sharing, and not simply the stuff. I know there's been a whole lot of discourse around, particularly those of us who are maybe Gen Xers or elder millennials, our parents getting older, and then they have all this bric-a-brac. They're very much maximalists, and so now people are more minimalist and all that kind of stuff. I don't mean like you need to save your mother or your grandmother's china, although maybe you do. But how did your grandparents get married? Like, what happened? How old was your grandfather? How old was your grandmother? Okay, so when did your mother get to this country? Oh, like those kinds of stories and the pictures that go along with them and the trinkets. I think sometimes people think it's like the things, the dress, which could be a wonderful artifact for the future. But these stories, I think particularly from female family members, if you can get them. Yeah.
I was also thinking about that when you just said that. So I've only been here maybe almost 2 years. But in preparing, I went to go find something I did before when I was at Emory. And because of how things changed, everything was wiped offline. So I couldn't find like an old flyer I made or an old program that I was just trying to use to reference. But lucky me, I kept a bunch of the things, like the physical programs, because I had done I worked on processing the SCLC papers, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference papers, like all the programs and all the flyers. So I knew that those kind of things tell a story and they matter. Yeah, but that is one of the downsides, you know, of where we are now. And when everything is digital, then it can be erased really quickly. So print your things, print your papers.
You should print your things. Nothing is ever lost, though. Yeah. I think our descendants will find a way to uncover ancient Friendster and MySpace messages.
Not my Black Planet.
Your Black Planet, girl. I was Nubian 180. Yes.
It was wait and see. W8.
Oh, yeah. No, we were very corny. But
okay. Yeah. Okay, that leads me to my final question before we hand it over to the audience, and it's actually a good segue. So we're building an experiential learning lab out of the Women's Center where students are going to kind of get to sit and think deeply about particular areas around like praxis, like how we blend things. This year, they are going to be focused on the digital realm. So new technologies, big data, AI, that kind of thing, and the social impact. So not just that it's bad, but like, or good, like, but where is that kind of gray area? Yeah. What kinds of questions do you think Butler would be asking about these technologies right now? What would she be asking us to pay attention to? And what are you paying attention to?
Yeah, I think that she would have lots of questions around AI and the data centers, the sort of environmental impact.
Yeah.
She considered herself, to be an environmentalist, so I think she would be very concerned about the larger impacts. Like, why are we moving so quickly? Why are we not finding ways to build this technology in ways that are more sustainable? I think she'd be thinking about sustainable technology more generally. I think she'd be very worried about the sort of reliance on AI to do, it's like a mental calculator, in terms of just, it's a shortcut to everything, right? And she wasn't against, tools or hacks or things. She had to come up with many for herself, to navigate this neurotypical world. But, the sort of outsourcing of art and literature part of AI, I think she would be having questions about. I teach at a technical institute, so we're always talking about technology. It's always technology and insert a thing, right? And so I have lots of concerns around the environmental impacts of AI as well. But as a professor, this is year 19 for me, I guess. So I've seen many students over the years, and I am increasingly worried about students' ability to trust themselves, to be sure in their own, what is it that you believe and think, right? Because you have something that is specific and interesting and unique to you, and we need to know about it. But I don't know that young people get asked those questions really until you get to undergrad, and then everybody's asking you the question, and you're like, well, nobody asked me this 5 years ago, and so how am I supposed to understand how to navigate? You know what I mean? And I think whether it's AI or social media or other forms of technology, they're sort of giving us these answers, but they're not actually giving us answers, right? I think it makes people less sure of themselves, not just young people. I kind of called y'all out a little bit, but I think people of all ages, but because y'all have been raised in this era, so much falls to you, I want to hear more confident kind of like, I believe this, even if it's wrong. To learn, you have to get things wrong.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, it's y'all turn. Any
thank you.
Any questions?
Hi, my name is Mariana. I was really interested by what you have to say about AI. I currently work in the public school experience officer as well. And I kind of see I know we're technically the same generation, but with just how much has changed between where I am at and where it feels like my students are at these days, it feels like a completely different generation. I think about how much I spent my time, or what I spent my time doing, and I'm an unabashed nerd, and it really seems that, the kids are not reading these days. And I say that kind of as a joke, but I say that kind of seriously. And I do wonder about, I don't know, I guess the future of kind of the political imagination that's going on in something like your life or Octavia Butler's life, and how we can kind of see that going into the future with these kind of technological changes that are happening so fast.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this earlier about moving, as teachers, as a pedagogy, thinking about having students do more things on paper, more tactile, having an analog bag, like all the different language that we sort of use. To me, that is a way to combat some of that. I hate the language of deficiencies, but that's the thing that comes to mind, right? Is like a deficient understanding. Again, it goes back to resting on your own laurels, my own intelligence. I can figure this out. I can solve this problem. And when I use these other things, they are tools, right? They help me to do things, but they're not the whole answer, right? And I think that those of us with any skin in the game who have a little bit of power, it is up to us to create environments where young people can have access to that kind of practice. It's harder for K through 12 folk. College professors, we don't have as much scrutiny except when we do. But yeah, because not everyone has the you impulse or Octavia Butler impulse to be like, okay, in my free time, what I'm going to do is go to the library and learn these things, right? So when we do have access to folks, people in our lives, people that we're raising or we're in community with or what have you, grabbing the tool that you grabbed, you're like, hold on, my kids learn through this. I'm going to, because we are responsible for the next generations, right? So giving students, young people, kids in your life, elders, the opportunity to be in space where we're just learning and there's no grade or anything attached. It's just for the fun of it. I think it's part of that. How do we do that while trying to survive capitalism? I don't have the answer. But, yeah.
Hi, first, thank you so much for coming and speaking to all of us. It's a super enriching discussion, and I was in person. My question is, earlier when you were talking about the institution that you're a part of, you mentioned that there's a tension with you as a theorist versus you as a maker. So I was wondering if you could speak to maybe your own work as a theorist, but also in worldmaking or Octavia Butler's interest in people thinking her as a theorist rather than a seer, probably. Or also just as someone who literally is making worlds through fiction, but also is trying to affect the physical reality.
Yeah. I think that my work as a Black feminist is world-making work. I think that my work as an Afrofuturist is also world-making work. So I personally don't have a tension between the making aspect, but I think there is a sort of breakdown, particularly if you're going sort of maybe a social sciencey bent, that if you're not creating you're not working with a large language model to do this kind of data collection, or if you're not physically creating the sculpture, then what's the tangible thing that you're doing? And I'm like, well, I'm trying to get 30 people to think critically. That's the main thing I would like to accomplish here, those kinds of things. And that is kind of a world-making project. I think to speak to Butler, oftentimes, if I can generalize, writers are less interested in labels than critics are. I think critics, it's helpful for me. I'm an Afrofuturist, but the people that we study sometimes are like, I just don't want to even be aligned with these various terms. And so I think, though, reading, her letters, her interviews, her diary entries, Butler wanted folks to take her seriously as a thinker, right? And so again, some of the thing about her being an oracle or seer, kind of undercuts that a bit when she's like, actually, I can show you my work. Like, this is what I've done. This is how I've come here. This is actually something that can be replicated, right? Maybe not to the exact same degree, but you can read these books, you can go to these seminars, you can think through these questions, and you can arrive at a particular answer. I did not get this information kind of beamed into my head. I had to work for it and wrestle with it. Calliope the Muse did not hand this to me, right? So you too can do this work because it's work. Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much for taking the time. My name is Psalms. I'm actually WHS alum, back here for grad school, but you brought up an idea very briefly, but I thought it was really interesting about how young people are using AI, and I think something that I've been really curious about, I'm curious how you probably see it, is this idea of using AI. So many people use it as a therapist, they use it as a person they talk to, and we know in Black feminist theory and queer theory, the big topics there are like self-actualization and self-definition and all the work that goes into doing that outside of the gaze and white supremacy and all the other parts, right? What do we begin to imagine or happens to young people when they begin to define themselves against what they're being told through a LLM, right? When that quote-unquote collective consciousness that we once got in community and from our our ancestors and from our mother is now being literally engineered and fed to them, and their self-actualization is deeply predicated on this like weirdly aggregated assumption of their identity through an LLM.
Yeah, I mean, it's another potential tool of insert whatever system of power, right? There are all these examples of AI joining Twitter or different things, and after like a day of exposure to the algorithm, they're saying, all kinds of racist things and so on, because this is not neutral technology. So in some ways, yes, there's a lot to be concerned with AI, but in other ways, to me, it functions similar to the various technologies of the day. So I'm thinking, follow me. Like the minstrel show was a particular kind of communication technology in the 19th century, right? It helps to inaugurate pop culture as we know it, right? And it's rooted in these racist depictions of Black folk. And then there are newspapers becoming more prevalent and people becoming more literate. So then more people are reading. There are different ways to disseminate these various truths about capitalism, white supremacy, imperialism, et cetera, right? And I think ChatGPT, in some ways, it's not a one-to-one correlation, but it's just another tool that could be used to that end, right? It doesn't have to be, but we see that it tends to, right, spit back what the larger culture, because it's just using our stuff to learn from, right? So if it's learning from, a white supremacist culture or a rape culture or something like that, then it's going to spew that back out. So I'm not dismissive of its import, but to me, it's just another savvy way of like, oh, okay, well, before it was streaming and now it's this particular thing, or it was music videos. It's just another part of the larger toolkit of these systems of power. Did you know that our book, Crunk from This Collection, was used by Claude AI? To one of the things to train itself on. Yeah. Lenise told me. Yeah, we gotta.
Yeah, we do.
Our actual work. Yeah. So I don't know if that seems dismissive, but I definitely don't mean it that way. I think like, okay, AI is going to help do that work, some of that work. But that means that just as these spaces that were used to degrade Black folk or to forward anti-queer, et cetera, like we always take the technology and use it ourselves too. Yeah. Right? So I see Black folk training AI models to do all kinds of things, right? It doesn't make it less problematic in terms of its environmental impact, but it's not simply that we're being acted upon by the technology. We always engage with it too.
Like where there's power, there's resistance.
Yeah.
On both sides. Yeah.
But it is scary.
It is.
It is.
Okay. Thank you for coming. My name is Robin. And I was really struck deeply by how you mentioned earlier that community is very important, and how you also mentioned that young people need to trust themselves, even if they're wrong or if they're right, even though how can you really be wrong or right? It's a gray zone. I was wondering, where do you recommend, like, if this were to be enacted on, like, right now, how would one start? Like, where do you start to trust yourself?
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
Right, I know I have to read.
Yeah, light work, yeah. Oh, there's so many ways. I don't have all the ways, but I'll share some of the ways that I think it works. Being in community with people who are seeking similar knowledge about themselves or similar strengths about themselves. It's hard to do this kind of work of undoing the sort of colonizing of our minds if the folks that you're around are like, why are you questioning? That's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to be around some folks who are also questioning things, right? I think asking, who does it serve for me not to believe in myself?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that both on an individual kind of way, but also like in a systemic. Who does it serve for me to not be confident in myself?
Mm.
That confidence in oneself doesn't mean that you always know the answer, but I think there should be confidence in your ability to find things out and make choices based on what you learn, right? That doesn't involve being perfect, being all-knowing or all-seeing or anything. It just involves being curious and motivated and, you know, willing to do that work. It's very hard work. But it's a decolonization process. You know, this idea that we are supposed to trust an outside authority primarily, and that's what we judge ourselves, our actions, our thoughts against, you know, that's a pretty common way to think, right? So if you're undoing that work, you're decolonizing your mind. You no longer have that kind of hovering. And I'm not saying go out and like don't have any morals. No. Please adhere to a system of morality. Definitely not arguing against that. But this idea that you don't know many things, and therefore, since you don't know things, you always have to be looking for other people, not for guidance, not for community or for folks to be your interlocutor, but for answers.
I'm thinking a little bit about how, let me see your mic. I know people can't hear. Like how many of us in this room have struggled with not trusting ourselves, and we might have called that imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like AI is changing that? Whereas like we might have had imposter syndrome in grad school. We had to figure out how to work through it because I'm gonna get this thing and I need to figure out, you know, how to find my voice, how to share my voice. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like AI is kind of getting in the way of what would be a normal process of you pushing through it? Because now you can ask chat about what you think first. Like how do you feel like it's doing something different than what was there before?
I think that hurts folks, and I think it hurts our thinking because it does not necessarily, and this is completely anecdotal, I have not done no longitudinal study about nobody's latitude, you know what I mean? Like I haven't done anything. But I'm imagining that what I see with my own students and young people that I work with, that trusting yourself comes from trying and failing and then continuing to try again. And if you seem like you just found the answer and you just stop there, then what are you really learning? And there's usually a kind of struggling section to the learning aspect. Like if you're learning a new language, you're like, I kind of know the vocab, but when I try to talk to somebody, I feel like a deer in headlights. Okay, well now you need to level up to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. And you don't even know what questions to ask ChatGPT if you haven't been struggling on your own.
Yeah.
You don't know what to ask Claude for real, if you haven't come up with your own thing, right? You're just getting these really pat answers. So I don't think that helps to empower people. Even when, you know, and I have my issues with imposter syndrome as a concept, but there was at least some attention to how do you get yourself to understand that you're not an imposter, that actually deserve to take up space in this place? And I don't know that chat is doing that.
Yeah.
I feel like AI is like, thanks for asking that question. That was so brave of you to do that. And so
Sis. Yes, queen.
Your professor should totally give you an extension on that paper. Like, okay, so now, but when I go to write the paper, what am I gonna do? How do I even come up with the ideas? And I find myself in meetings sometimes with students, they're like, well, how do I find that thing out? And I'm like, you have to figure it out for yourself. They're like, damn it.
Yeah.
You know, and not out of lack of intelligence or unwillingness to learn, but that's really hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Hi, I'm Adrian. So I'm in Professor Field's class right now. We just finished reading Parable of the Sower, so this is an awesome experience for all of us. But we've been talking a lot about AI, but we haven't kind of touched on like social media and digital media and the rapid consumption of that response. And it's like TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and anything like these like rapid consumption of fake media that promotes racist and sexist and ableist thinking. And especially in like my generation and people that I'm surrounded by, there's like, we'll even be in classes and they'll be like, oh, I saw this on TikTok, this is the answer. And it's just not true. And there's like a total lack of critical thinking. And you were talking about that, and I was wondering what you would say, like what you told your students about how to encourage critical thinking and what we could even say to our peers. Because also we talked about Audre Lorde and the importance of hearing from people that look like you and have similar experiences from you. So like how can we also encourage like moving away from this just like rapid consumption and lack of actually thinking about anything more deeply?
I wish I had the answer, but I have some thoughts. I think that just even like asking the question, some of the answer has to come from inside the house. So it's young people sort of talking to one another because like us old fogies, what do we know? You know what I mean? I'm just out here being a millennial and whatever. No, but in all due seriousness, I think it's something for young people to talk about amongst yourselves. Like when you're seeing like your peers say things that are wild and crazy kids, right? That, hey, that just because it's on TikTok doesn't mean that it's true. I think for those of us who are engaging with young people in other ways, like in a authoritative capacity and so on, right? I think that we have to give Gen Zers more grace because we were not raised under a sort of similar perpetual onslaught of destabilizing images, right? We're the sort of generation that sort of started to get a little bit of that infiltrated into our world. So I teach a class on the 90s and we talk about Rodney King. So the issue of his beating and also the court case and the exoneration of the police officers and the subsequent riots. And we talk about how when he was beaten in a videotape, that videotape was on the news at 5 and 5:30 and 6 and 6 at the 6:30 news. It came on 10 p.m. on 2020. It came on 11 p.m. at the nightly news. It came on afterwards at Nightline. But y'all get that every day about every single thing, right? So some of the expectations that those of us who are older have are inappropriate expectations. Because y'all are dealing with a level of stimuli that is kind of unheard of. Because we're dealing with it too, except we had a good 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 year head start, right? Where we were doing stupid stuff and there's no evidence. It's just somewhere on an instant camera that hopefully got destroyed. And so I think that those of us who work with young people have to give options of like low stimulating assessments that force us to deal with what is right here, right? So we're reading the passage and we're talking about it, or we're watching the thing and we're only watching this thing and we're not engaging with another thing while we are doing that one thing over there, right? Like rejecting the multitasking when we can. And I think that is something that can be had in classrooms, but also in clubs, you know, in organizing on campus and so on, like a deep presentism. I know presentism can be bad, but like being present with your community, with your roommate, with your class. I think that could do wonders too, right? Like leaning again on your own understanding rather than trying to find out from somewhere else, right? And last thing I'll say, because I am an English professor, is like, well, let's post read this TikTok. Is this real? Is this real? I don't know. How can we find out? Well, who's the creator? Okay, let's go down that rabbit hole. Oh, are they being paid to do? Oh, okay. I see that some of their sponsorship comes from this, this, and this. Like we can still try as much as we can. It's hard to believe the things in front of our eyes. I mean, these days, particularly with deep fakes, but
I do think there's a yearning though. I do think there's a yearning for community and in-person experiences.
Yeah.
Both because of like, I think people are feeling social media is a lot. Like it doesn't always feel good after doom scrolling like that. And your time kind of being, I think about Percy Jackson when they went into like the arcade and like realized like days had passed, but they thought they were only in there for minutes. But like, I think that people are wanting to come back. It's the way that, and I do think some of it is that AI is on social media. So you're like reading people's posts that you can clearly tell was written by ChatGPT, and then people's responses also written by ChatGPT. You're like, okay, enough. Okay, let me touch grass for real. Yeah. I think the fact that like y'all are all here now is evidence of that like people, those lectures on tap that I was talking about, they're like full because people just want to hear from real people. You don't really know when you're watching a movie, like, is it AI, is it CGI, what's going on? So like a lot of people are returning to theater because you know that that's real. Like, so I think we're seeing a return to in-person experiences, which is why I think, you know, the questions I was asking about, like, but how do you do community? Because like that's next, right? Like we're in community again, and you know, you might have to be told, like, can you not sing while we are... You know, sometimes it's happening when you're in community, when you're in person, that we're just like not really used to doing anymore. But I do think that a return is happening. I'm hopeful that there is one.
Yeah.
Oh, I think Victoria has, yeah. She's behind.
Hi, I'm Emma, and I'm also in Dr. Bill's Women and Gender Studies class. And thank you for being here. I really, like you said, like I feel like seeing people talk in person and getting to do something that is not your lecture every Monday and Wednesday is rare. But luckily, your university has a lot of opportunities to do that. So thank you. And my question is, how did Butler deal with kind of the inundation of like resources and news? Like, did she ever get overwhelmed with that type of thing? And how was she, especially if she was dealing with like her neurodivergence and the way she's treated by others? Is there a specific way that she was able to deal with that and that we can apply to today, or that maybe you do as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. Butler basically treated the news like it was her open classroom and so on. But there were times many times where she was just like, I'm gonna go to the movies. I'm gonna go watch Star Wars for the whatever time. I'm gonna go see Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which she had questions about. But that having like a sort of disconnect to a certain degree from some of the things that are happening in the world, it was never permanent for her, but there were times where she sort of had to move away from the constant research and constant writing, because that was her main job for most of her career, was 100% all day being a writer. So how do you turn your life's work off, right? Was sort of the question. She was never fully able to, but she would take these sort of breaks and sojourns. And, you know, like I said, she had this deep correspondence with people and she went places and so on. I try to practice a similar thing, and I understand that I have a fair amount of privilege as a tenured professor, right? It's not the same like when I was an undergrad and I was trying to get that degree. And so pleasure reading, when was I doing that? I wasn't doing that, you know. But what got me through that time was community, many of whom I still am friends with today, where we'd be like, there's this thing called Blockbuster. It's where you rented videos. Anyway, we would go to Blockbuster and rent these videos and order pizza and just, you know, I also went to a very high intensity undergrad. So, you know, it feels like you can't do those things, but you have to do those things in order to be able to do the work for your various professors, right? Having that balance. Butler didn't always have that balance. Once she got to a certain place in her career, she was able to take more time off, but because she was a professional writer for almost all of her career, right? That was the main way she made her money. That meant that she had to do things like chase down her agent, right? And be like, where's my money? Or give talks. Talks are great and wonderful to give, right? But she would be like, if I give this many talks, then I can get this much money. To, you know, so she had to deal with very many mundane aspects of just like, how am I going to feed myself, right? So that was also part of not feeling like she could unplug, right? Because she had things that she had to do. But again, I'm being honest about my level of privilege that, I try to work Monday through Friday. I know that it's not possible for everybody, but I actually learned this from our girl Brittany, our collaborator and our colleague who is very prolific. And when we were in school together, she was like, yeah, my brain kind of shuts off at 5 p.m. on Friday and I have to like not do anything. And I was like, I'm working 7 days a week. Meanwhile, I'm not as productive. Yeah, because we're not machines, and even machines need rest. So in some ways, Octavia is not the best model because, you know, she had to work so hard and she died so young. By the time she had the time to rest, she was already dealing with major health issues, right? And so I take that also as a cautionary tale. There's Audre Lorde, Toni Cade Lombard, there's several other of her peers who died young, who had cancer or different kinds of ailments and so on, right? And you can't self-care your way out of having cancer. That's not possible. You can't just get a massage and make everything okay. But if there are structural things at the institution that you're at that can help you, right, take that time out where you can unplug, right, not forever, but where you can pour back into yourself, then you have to take it. Because it's your life.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Someone has one. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I'm gonna draw the names. But yes, thank you, Suzanne. I have a little gift for you, but I forgot to bring it right here. So thank you very much for being our first Women's History Month keynote. Thank you all for attending.